Hi, guys. Welcome to the Church Split. My name is Will. We got Brian with us today.
What's up, heretics?
And you guys know what we do here. We help you escape your church's echo chamber, learn to think biblically, and, of course, always challenge the status quo. That always needs challenging. So today, we're really excited because, one, we have done more pro-life content, I think, on this channel than any other topic.
Yep.
And now I know we're late to the party. Everyone knows that Roe V Wade has been overturned by the Supreme Court. What? You didn't know that?
I didn't know that.
Wow. Brian, we should talk about you being our co-host. Luckily, we have a possible new recruit right here for your position. So we just tell her we'll double your salary. Anyway, so with that being said, we have Constitutional Attorney Katherine Henry with us. She is actually an old friend of the channel.
Yes.
We helped join with supporting her here during COVID with the Restore Freedom Initiative. And of course, she has been a huge heavy hitter here. She's actually got some things that she's dealing with that we can actually help support her, but also she is a constitutional attorney, so she actually does know a few things about said constitution, and she's a believer, so also we have that on our side as well.
Yes.
Now, a couple of things about Katherine before we give her the floor. Not only is she a constitutional attorney, but she has actually helped lead the fight against freedom and now has her own court case regarding this. And so if you guys really want to, I would encourage to listen to what she has to say here and how you can support her in that fight. She's been a good friend of ours, and we want to keep that going. So with that being said, Brian, do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm just excited to have Katherine. She's just
I know.
always a wealth of knowledge.
Go check out our videos with her in the past. She helped. That was back when we were first kind of hitting the map pretty good, and then she joined us, and it helped. So anyway, with that being said, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Check out hers in the description below. You can follow her at Katherine Henry on YouTube. She's actually got a bigger platform than us. We're not jealous at all. So with that being said, Katherine Henry, welcome to the Church Split again.
Well, thank you. And if it makes you feel any better about my the size of my YouTube channel, it grew to that size in about 3 weeks' time and literally hasn't grown since, because obviously they decided they didn't want me to get any more YouTube subscribers. So, yeah.
You were shadow banned.
I have been shadow banned since October of 2020. So if you can imagine that. Statistically impossible for my channel not to grow. But
so just so everyone knows, only the good channels get shadow banned. So
that's true.
That is why you should go subscribe and check out what she has to offer. And also, guys, just so you know, she is extremely busy. She's got a booked week, and she was able to squeeze us in. And in case you can't tell, she is squeezed us in so much, she is literally outside. So thank you for doing that. So anyway, with that being said, we got so much to talk about regarding this topic. First off, I think this was a huge win for both constitutional conservatives and also Christians. We still got a ways to go in the fight. What?
It's a win. It's a win. I wouldn't say it's a huge win, but it's a win.
Fair enough. All right. So, Brian, I know this is kind of one of your shticks. I'll go ahead and give the floor to you.
Yeah, I've been geeking out on all the constitutional stuff, so I'm excited to hear Katherine's opinion on it. She did a video on it maybe yesterday or 2 days ago. I was like, I'm not going to watch it because I just want to hear it first on our channel. So I'll watch it later. But Katherine, why was this a win, and maybe why wasn't it a big win with the case last week?
So it's important to kind of think about what the court is doing overall, because actually my weekly show that I do, Restore Freedom Weekly, that I talked about it, I actually was talking about not just this case, but the court had 3 huge decisions all within like a 3 or 4 day span. And the third one came out Monday morning. So there's a religious freedom case that came out, there's the abortion case, and then a Second Amendment case. And all 3 came out, like I said, it was like Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, or Thursday, Friday, Monday, something like that. So I found it interesting to read some of the pieces from each of the cases, because there's a lot of overlap in some of the way that they arrived at some of these conclusions, some of the ways that they approach stare decisis, which is, the law of, basically like a settled point of law, precedent that, you're not supposed to overturn precedent, supposedly. And, I don't like calling things case law because judges aren't allowed to make law. That's why we have separation of powers. But at any rate, so, there's some interesting things that were said in some of the cases that actually apply to all three. And I didn't even think to grab the other two cases, to kind of lay out some of what I'm talking about. But I don't know if you guys made the decisions, the PDFs of the decisions available to people if they wanted to read them. But on my the video I did on Tuesday, which was on Rumble and YouTube and Facebook, I'm pretty sure in the description of the video I do have the full PDF to all three of the decisions I went over, including this Dobbs decision that we're talking about. So if anybody wanted to try to follow along later, or just wanted to read it, which I would encourage people to do, it's not in French, I promise. Then the full PDF is available there. And in my free time, which I have so much of, I also plan to put all three decisions on my website as well. So, but anyway, some of the things I wanted to point to is, sorry, I'm outside, so I have like my little tiny hairs that are flying around in my head and tickling my face. And they're blonde, so nobody else can see them but me, so I just look like a crazy person. Like, ah! Okay. But I'll sit into the wind. Maybe that'll help. And then you get to see the handsome guy behind me. So don't pick your nose, okay? They can see you. Okay. So,
Hi, Mike.
they're saying hi, Mike. So a couple of the things as to like why it's a big, I guess, okay, before I get into the pointing out, oh, I dropped my pen. That's cool. Anyway, what you get when you sit on a park bench in the middle of a strange town. So anyway, before I look at my notes or things that are actually highlighted from the decision, I guess I can point out to, Roe v. Wade and Casey, those cases, the Roe case and the Casey case, those are overturned. I mean, the court explicitly overturned those. So that's the good part. The bad part is that the biggest bad part is that the court said, well, we got to turn, basically the decision on regulating abortion over to the states. That's the first bad part. Why is that bad? Well, last I checked, and actually it's funny, this ties into how you kind of introduced me. I forget how you said it, Will, but you said something about, I'm a constitutional attorney, so I know something about that, and I'm a believer, so, there's that too. And I thought, well, really, now that I think about it, you can't really understand the Constitution if you are not a believer, because our Constitution and our entire form of government is literally premised on the rights that are given to us by God, and that we're thankful for those blessings of liberty. I mean, those words are literally written right into the U.S. and Michigan constitutions. Of course, the exact terms of being grateful to Almighty God for the blessings of freedom, that's in the Michigan Constitution preamble, but the U.S. Constitution preamble pretty much starts the same way, just has a few more elements in there. So that's super important in the context of this case, because why would I be upset about it being a state, going back to the states? Well, there's a few problems with that. First of all, I guess I'll start with the thing that is something that people maybe have talked about a little bit more, or terms that people have thought about a little bit more. I'm assuming you guys have heard of the term states' rights.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So states don't have rights. That's nowhere in the Constitution. It's the dumbest thing ever for people who claim to be constitutional conservatives to talk about anything to do with states' rights. In the 9th Amendment, the U.S. Constitution talks about our unenumerated rights, that we as people created by God, we have all of the amendments, 1 through 8, all of the rights that are listed or enumerated in rights, the Bill of Rights, but 1 through 8, the amendments. And then we have, which is why I think it's funny that the first 10 are considered the Bill of Rights. But anyway, I'll get there in a second. But it's 1 through 8. And then 9 is saying, hey, listen, just because we didn't list a particular right doesn't mean we don't have it. We kept all of the rights. I want to say the Ninth Amendment talks about retaining. They both have R words and they both mean retain. But anyway, the Ninth and 10th Amendment use slightly different words. But anyway, we're retaining all of the rights that are given to us by God. We are simply highlighting in the Constitution the things that we've already known by the time that these amendments were adopted. We're just highlighting the things we knew were of circumstance. Particular egregious actions by the Crown, in terms of colonial America and whatnot, that we needed to put in there. Quartering soldiers. Okay, that's something that most people don't even realize is in the Third Amendment, but most people don't think about that because that really hasn't been a thing in the last 200 years.
Yeah.
But it was something that was important back then. So anyway, so the Ninth Amendment says, listen, God gave us all of our liberty. We're just especially protecting these that we listed, but guess what? It's still the government's job to protect all the other liberties that we have, and we're keeping them. We're retaining them. So then you go to the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment doesn't say anything about states' rights because states don't have rights. God didn't give states or governments rights. We, the people, gave certain authority, certain power to the state government, to the federal government. And of course, in giving certain powers, we also explicitly put certain restrictions or, I can't think of other words, but basically restrictions upon the exercise of those powers. So the 10th Amendment is saying, okay, so, the U.S. government, the federal government is, it's given, this chunk of power. We, the people, gave the federal government this chunk of power. And then in the Constitution, we also gave certain restrictions for state or federal governments that they can't do certain things. And then, of course, you have the first, 9 amendments as well that place restrictions on the government. So anything that's a power that is not talked about there, well, then we're going to reserve, see, there's the other word, we're going to reserve those powers either to the individual states or to the people. Well, people always forget about the states' rights fanatics, always forget about the people. But the states, if anything, are given powers or authorities, but the word there is powers. They're not given rights. The states don't have inherent rights. They don't have a right to own property. They may have the power to own property to, exercise on behalf of the people or things of that nature. But at any rate, it's important that we recognize that because rights are literally what are given to us by God. That's what's in the Constitution. So why is that important? And what does that have to do with this case? Okay, well, states don't have rights. I just went over that. And all of our rights come from God. And last I checked, I'm pretty sure there's some sort of commandment in there somewhere, one of the 10, thou shalt not kill. And so if we're not allowed, well, I don't know if you guys can hear that. Somebody was really excited to get out of here. If murdering is not allowed, if there's a commandment that tells us not to murder, I'm pretty sure that it's the ability to murder an unborn child is not one of those unenumerated blessings of liberty that God gave us. And all the unenumerated rights that are, covered and talked about, referenced basically by the Ninth Amendment, those are literally the rights that are given to us by God. So God did not give us the right to murder the unborn. So then there's this part in here where, let's see, the court is talking about, well, it's kind of talking about a few things, but basically they're talking about, well, the Roe case, Roe v. Wade, was talking about it in terms of it's a right to privacy, that the right to have an abortion is a right to privacy. It stems from having a right to privacy. And sorry, I'm trying to hold a good angle. This is not working for me. The Casey case described it as the freedom to make intimate, I can't say this with a straight face given what's happening in COVID, the freedom to make intimate and personal choices that are central to personal dignity and autonomy. Wait, shouldn't that include masks and vaccinations and everything else that's been mandatory? Anyway. So then the court points out this, which I totally agree with. Ordered liberty, like organized, ordered liberty sets limits and defines the boundary, not just of our rights in general, but it defines the boundary between competing interests. That is literally the whole purpose of government. I mean, we can look at the Declaration of Independence, and it explains, governments are there to protect our liberties, so that when I'm out there exercising my liberty, the example I used the other day, let's say, Brian, let's say you and I are neighbors. You moved down to Florida. I couldn't tell which one of you was more excited to move down, so we'll just
Definitely
say it with
me.
you. So we'll say you and I are now neighbors, and I'm remodeling my house, and we're digging stuff out. We have all kinds of lumpy spots in our yard, so we're digging stuff out, and we're digging. We can't grow grass because it's all sand, because we live a walking distance, 5 minutes to the ocean. It's great. I'm not complaining, but we can't grow grass, so we have all these weeds. So we're digging them out. Let's say I have these piles and piles of weeds, and you and I are neighbors, and I decide, well, I'm not forced to keep these weeds. I can remove them. So I remove them. I put them all in this big, bucket thing, my wheelbarrow, and I wheel it over to the property line, and I just dump it all onto your property. And then, we continue remodeling, and we decide we're going to, update our plumbing and electrical, and, rip out some old drywall. And so, gosh, this debris is just piling up, and well, no problem. I'm just going to wheel it over to the property line and dump it on your property. Well, that's a clear example of that's the purpose of government. When something like that happens, and that's pretty, hopefully no one would ever be that stupid to think they have the right to do that. But that'd be an example of where me exercising the ability to use my property as I see fit is now impacting the ability of you to exercise dominion over your property as you see fit. And so that's where the government is supposed to step in, is just in the exercise of my rights if I'm impinging on you exercising your right. So that is the whole purpose of government. I'm actually a little frustrated at how downplayed this point is in here. But anyway, so it's talking about defining the boundary between competing interests. So then it says, Roe and Casey each struck a particular balance between the interests of a woman who wants an abortion and the interests of what they term a potential life. And so, okay, here's where I'm going to jump down for a second, okay? So then a little while later, several pages later, the court then talks about what sharply distinguishes the abortion right from the rights recognized in those other two cases. Like they did a lot of analogies and comparisons. Oh, you have the right to do this and you have the right to do that. Well, what sharply distinguishes the right, so-called right to an abortion versus the right to do all these other things is that, and these other two cases, the Roe v. Wade and Casey case, both of these acknowledge this. Abortion is different, the court says, because it destroys what Roe termed potential life and what the law in this particular case that's being challenged calls an unborn human being. So literally, what they're saying is the difference between this so-called right to an abortion and all these other rights that they're trying to draw this analogy to say, okay, well, it's okay, is that this is the only one where you exercising this so-called right literally means the death of another human being.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not the right to
whoa.
bodily autonomy here, right? As you were stating, it's not the right to bodily autonomy because you're infringing on someone else's bodily autonomy.
Exactly. I mean, their whole existence. It's not even autonomy. I mean, of course, an infant or a newborn or an unborn baby, you know, they're not going to exercise autonomy, but they certainly have the right to life. I'm pretty sure that actually is in the Constitution. So anyway, and then the court points out that none of the other decisions that were cited by the Roe and Casey cases involved the critical moral question posed by abortion, which again, the court is like skirting the issue. These are supposedly the conservative constitutionalist judges, and they literally can't come out and say, none of the other cases are talking about where you're murdering someone, and since we get our rights from God, and God said, no, you shall not murder, that is not one of the rights that God gave us that the government is supposed to protect. Like, so.
Yeah, one could argue that's like the most basic right the government should protect is life.
That's well, supposedly that's what they've been trying to do with all the COVID-19 regulations, right? I mean, they're supposedly doing it, you know, telling us to wear masks and social distance and be injected with experimental DNA gene therapy and all that other stuff because it's going to save lives. If they're not doing it to save lives, then why the heck would they be trying to get us to do that, right?
Yeah.
So I skipped the part, and this is the part I'm going to come back to because this is kind of worded in between, but yet it didn't make sense because then they continued to say things that explain why it doesn't make sense. So they talked about this striking a balance. The two cases, you know, they did strike a balance. But then the court said, but the people of the various states may evaluate those interests, meaning the interest of the woman to have an abortion versus the interest of the baby to not be murdered. That the people of the various states may evaluate those two interests differently. The nation's historical understanding of ordered liberty does not prevent the people's elected representatives from deciding how abortion should be regulated. Okay, now deciding how it should be regulated, that's one thing. So for example, if we talk about plain murder, I should double check. Last I checked anyway, last I knew, I think, if I remember right, it's been many years since I was in my death penalty seminar in law school. But Florida has the death penalty. Texas has the death penalty. Michigan explicitly states in the Michigan State Constitution there shall be no penalty for death for any crime. So each state for murder, for example, they are, what was the wording? They are deciding how that particular offense should be regulated, right? Everywhere in the entire country, it's illegal to murder someone, but the circumstances, each state might treat a little bit differently. You know, you might have something be termed manslaughter versus, you know, premeditated murder or whatever. And depending on different factors, each state might, you know, some might have mandatory sentencing issues. You know, oh, well, this particular crime is so heinous, it always has to have at least 25 years to life or whatever. And like I said, some states have the death penalty and some don't. That's a way that a state, from state to state, that they can regulate it. And it's something that, you know, every single state, it's illegal to murder somebody, but they each kind of do it their own way. So that part makes sense. But when the court says, but the people of the various states may evaluate the interests of a woman to have an abortion versus a baby to not be murdered, that those interests could be valued differently. How is that? So what if the popular belief, if a segment of the population were to believe that it's okay to do that, the Bible still tells us you can't murder. And I'm pretty sure that in more than one place in the U.S. Constitution, we are guaranteed the right to life, liberty, and property, that those will not be taken away without due process of law. Well, state statutes that say, that criminalize any abortion except, for example, when the life of the mother is at risk.
Like
Or,
an ectopic pregnancy, right?
I'm not smart enough with medical terms, but we'll just go with that.
Sure. Okay, good. Okay.
But let's think about even, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but there are scenarios that I've heard stories where somebody had an abortion of one child because they were pregnant with multiples, and they were told that if they did not abort one, then both or all three or whatever would die. Well, I can imagine being faced with that decision. So, I mean, if you're saying all of the children that you're pregnant with are going to die, I mean, you're going to do whatever you can, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I can't imagine. Or, like I said, it's kind of an easier example if the life of the mother is at risk. Okay, well, as far as I know, most states that outright, sorry, that's probably really loud. Most states that outright criminalize all abortion, as far as I know, all have an exception for something like that, for the life of the mother.
Yep.
But even if there was a state that didn't do that, I would imagine what the due process clause requires then, by its very terms, is that the mother's life is not going to be put in jeopardy without her having basically an emergency hearing or whatever, that there would be something, some way for her to get the court or whomever to say, this is a scenario where your life will end if you don't have this procedure. So, that is not a decision for the government to make. That's a decision that you and your doctor or whomever needs to make. You can't set up somebody to be in a situation where they're going to certainly die. Like, for example, shutting down all kinds of medical procedures for 2 years because, we're going to 3 weeks to slow the curve or something like that. That would never happen. But I mean, honestly, that's the same scenario where the government is putting into place something where, there is imminent risk of death in situations. Well, yeah, you might need to treat that particular situation differently than you're treating all the rest.
But even
Because
then, the child, or like in this situation, like an ectopic pregnancy, which always results in the termination of the pregnancy. But even then, it's not because we're killing the child because we don't want the child. It's because the only resolution for such a scenario would be to terminate the pregnancy, so that way both don't die, only one would, which is still tragic, but we shouldn't treat it like it's an inhumane clump of cells that has no worth or value. We don't dehumanize it, we mourn the loss. We have actually a friend of ours who this very scenario happened, and they say that they think of this child often, of what could have happened with that child. But so to that point, it's more of a result of the situation as opposed to, well, this is really inconvenient, it's really hard for me, so I'm just going to remove its life entirely.
Well, and and there's situations that people talk about. What about in the context of a rape situation? Well, again, I use the analogy of, let's say there's a battered woman, and I myself have done a lot of work I've represented children in abuse and neglect cases as a guardian ad litem in 2 different states. I've represented a lot of women in abusive relationships, and especially in custody cases and divorces. I would never represent, somebody who's accused of abuse. I can't do it, and they deserve, their own good representation. So I've had to get out of cases that I was assigned to as a public defender because I couldn't do it. Anyway, so I'm an advocate for people who don't have a voice. I mean, if you know anything about my ministry that I've been doing for years, the thousands of gifts that I was putting together and care packages and stuff, some of them were for homeless shelters, but many of them throughout the years were for women and children at domestic abuse shelters. I mean, so I'm not somebody who just takes that topic lightly. I've delivered thousands of gifts that I put together by myself or with sometimes the help of that guy, or forcibly by some of my children that might have helped. But anyway, so I don't take the topic of abuse lightly. But if you had, let's say you know of somebody who is in an abusive relationship and they have, they've tried to get out. Okay, let's say it's May of 2020 or March of 2020. Okay, and all the domestic abuse shelters are now closed. And churches all around the state of, say, I don't know, Michigan, by and large, are closed because they're cowards and they're not real Christians and they're going to rot in hell. But they're closed. And resources that people, there aren't enough resources like that anyway. But the resources that many people did have the option to try to get to before, those are all gone. And the few that might have been remaining open, people didn't know which ones were open, right? Because everything is essentially closed. And you have people, I had people that were reaching out to me that were victims of domestic violence, and schools were closed and everything. And so this one sticks in my mind. The woman would take her child she'd leave for the day, drive around, and she would just, because gas wasn't $5 a gallon because Biden wasn't president. But anyway, she would, drive around, and then at times they would just sit and park in the parking lot of a church. The church was closed, but she would just sit and park there. And then law enforcement started coming after her and telling her, oh, this is, we have a curfew by an executive order. We're going to arrest you if you don't go to your house. And she's like, I can't go to my house. It's literally not a safe place. And there's no shelters. I have no opportunities to leave. So let's say it's the worst case scenario. It's something like that all over again. Things are shut down. People, you can't just say to somebody, oh, you could always leave. No, this is a scenario where someone is being abused on a regular basis, and they're worried about the life of their child. Let's say their abuser is the police chief. And so they can't just report them to the police. How's that going to work? Right? So it's something like that. Okay. Not that anybody in law enforcement would ever do things, illegal or unethical or unconstitutional, or like 3 grown men would ever physically assault a woman when she had her 6-year-old child with her or anything like that. Oh.
If that happened, it wouldn't be on video for everyone to watch.
Yes. By the way, it is on video, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, please go to the front page of my website, restorefreedomkah.com. But anyway, not all cops are bad. But anyway, so let's say this in this example, this woman literally, she can't report it. She has nowhere to go. Nothing is open. There's no resources, and she's literally worried that her child is going to continue suffering abuse at the hands of this abuser. I mean, that's like an impossible situation. Do people really think, like, as a show of hands from the two of you that I can see, I'm sure there's more people out there, but I can't see the comments because I'm on my phone. But the two of you, do either one of you think that you'd be okay with her doing it as like a mercy killing, that she has this infant at home that she's worried would be abused? So like logistically and like realistically, legitly concerned that this child will be abused, or at least witness the firsthand abuse, that she's experiencing. And she just doesn't want that kind of a life for her child. She wants to save her child from the suffering or from broken bones or whatever. Would it be okay then for her to just murder her infant so that the child didn't suffer?
Yeah, I think that's where the court steps in and says no.
Right. I've told my story on here 1,000 times over as an abuse victim myself, as brothers who were abused and in the foster system and the whole 9 yards. They're still happy they're alive and were able to eventually overcome such circumstances. You rob them of the ability to rise above and potentially create a stronger life for themselves through adversity. Now, of course, there's the risk of what can oftentimes happen in those scenarios. Someone can become a drug addict and a lot of other problems, but you're removing that choice from them. So that's it's a huge thing for me where it's like, yeah, I mean, we can paint, like you just did, a horrible picture. And it's like, but still the question comes in, is it still my choice to do a mercy killing here? You know what I mean? Like, or is that still another person? No matter how awful. Actually, it's funny. We have a meme that has gone viral on our page, and it says probably by the end of tonight, it's going to have over 1 million views on Facebook. And it was funny because I have people in there that were like, well, it's easy for you guys to say, I was in the foster system, I was molested, I was abused, and it'd be better to be dead than experience what I experienced. And I just pointed out the obvious, which is clearly not, because you're still here. If it was truly better to be dead, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
And I'm not trying to be a jerk or insensitive. It's just your life is valuable, and you should still be here.
Yeah. And we glad,
I say
glad they are.
bravo, good job. You endured. And not that you should ever have to endure such a thing. But again, we're talking about here, if we have the right to life, well, when does life begin, right? So if everyone has the right to life, liberty, and property, well, when does life begin? Well, we've done the SLED test on here before, but you can't say it's about a certain size. You can't say it's a certain level of development. You can't say it's an environment.
Hey, well, you're jumping like, a whole bunch, the court talks about that too, but I wanted to draw people to the analogy though.
Sorry.
That if you're talking about a rape victim, and while a rape victim, in those situations, you can't force a woman to have this baby then. Okay, well, if we just talked about a scenario where in the best of all intentions and in circumstances entirely outside of her control, there's a situation where a woman is just trying to do what's best to stop, any suffering at the hands of, an abuser for her little baby. If everybody with a moral conscience would say, yeah, you can't do that. I mean, it's not okay. Then why would it be okay to murder a baby who is the product of a sexual assault when there's not, in most of those cases, it's a one-time thing, in most of those types of sexual assault situations, it's like a stranger issue, where it was a stranger that raped someone. It's not going to be like this, custody battle or, anything like that. There's not going to be, if somebody doesn't want to, they're not able or not wanting to parent, that's what adoption is for. And, there's other options, but if murdering an infant is not okay, then murdering a preborn infant for the same scenarios is not okay.
Yeah, you really have to kind of extract yourself from morality in order to say that's okay. You really have to dehumanize that child and put in a different frame of mind in order to actually arrive to that conclusion.
Now, it's funny that you were making the point about, when does life begin? There's a couple of things that we got to talk about with that, but let's see, the court actually brings that point up. Well, just to finish that point about, states being able to decide differently or, basically people can have differing opinions about this. No, murder is murder and it's still murder. And since government is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, if it's doing anything extra aside from protecting our individual liberties, that in my exercise of my individual liberties, I'm not, throwing my garbage on Brian's property, for example. So anything beyond that. So in other words, 96%, no joke, of all the things that government does and has been doing for, my whole life, your whole life, right? 96% of that is not constitutional. Government should not be doing, any of that. There should be no Department of Education. There's no authority to have an entire IRS that does all these audits and whatever. Dang, those slivers are really actually getting to me. And they're so tiny I can't see them when it's this dark out. So anyway, that's all that government's job is. But government officials, government bodies, they're not allowed to, start chipping away at those individual liberties, such as the right to life, which is in the Constitution. And, they're not allowed to say, well, some rights are better than others, right? Women and men, people of all different colors, people of all different ages, we all have a right to life. In fact, it starts becoming a slippery slope if you think it's okay to, murder based on, well, the child's not going to have a good life because of XYZ. Okay, so what does that mean for the disabled population? What does that mean for people born with disabilities? What does that mean for people who are in serious or debilitating car accidents or things like that? Is it okay to say, well, we're going to euthanize that person because that person has Down syndrome, or that person has, severe autism, or whatever. That person is quadriplegic, or
it's all forms of eugenics, essentially.
Yes. And so, it's all related. And so the people that try to say, oh, no, that's totally unrelated. No, it's not, because it's a very slippery slope when we start saying, well, yeah, you can murder some lives, but just not others, and end those lives without any kind of due process whatsoever. At least, and I don't agree with the death penalty personally, but at least with the death penalty, in theory, the person, before they're ever, given an execution, they are given that due process through the courts. They're allowed to challenge things at the state level. Then they're allowed to challenge things at the federal level. They're allowed to make, the U.S. Supreme Court just came down, I think it was a couple days ago, Thursday, maybe yesterday, I don't know, somewhere very recently, where two, I believe, of the conservative justices actually joined with the liberal justices and on a death penalty case. And they were saying essentially that if somebody wants to be able to challenge, this particular person was trying to challenge lethal injection, and not saying that the court, or excuse me, that the government can't put him to death. I want to say it was Georgia, but not saying that Georgia couldn't put him to death for his crimes, but saying they couldn't put him to death by using lethal injection because all these health issues he has, and he doesn't have good veins, like based on some medical conditions he has, and they were going to have to like slice open his neck to try to tap it. And it was like this crazy. And by the way, if you've ever not researched lethal injections, I have actually studied that for an entire semester in law school, and it's actually pretty gruesome, and it should never have been used as a method to death penalty. But what he was asking for, and actually what I argued for, if there is going to be a death penalty, is firing squad. And that's literally what the guy's asking for. He's saying, you can put me to death, but just put me to death in the most humane way possible so that my body's not literally catching on fire from the inside out. That, it's firing squad. And quite frankly, no one should have to bear the burden of putting someone, be the one or two or three or whatever person that is responsible for putting someone to death that way. I mean, that does something to you. So anyway, all side notes, but that was also a very recent decision that came out as well. So it's kind of funny that, the court, I don't know, seeming to value life in some ways and not in others. But
well, I wanted to get to that because that's kind of an interesting point, Catherine, with kind of the consistency of the court. Obviously, this is, maybe in my opinion, more unique in some of the cases because there's so many different concurring opinions, and they seem to both be very disagreeing, but also still holding to the majority opinion. What is your take on Kavanaugh's concurring opinion and his take that essentially the government has absolutely no role whatsoever in protecting life from the abortion angle, and he like doesn't see even an argument for the 14th Amendment to protect life?
He's on crack and should be shot. Well, what I want to do is actually, that's a good way to respond to it is actually kind of tying back into the topic that Will was bringing out earlier. But the whole idea of what life is protected by the Constitution. When is life starting to be protected? And the court has this interesting point. The arbitrary viability line, right? That's, what courts have used then for quite some time, which Casey termed Roe's central rule. So that's their wording, but they're basically saying, since these cases, you've been able to have abortions based on whether the child was viable or not. But this arbitrary viability rule has not found much support among philosophers and ethicists who have attempted to justify a right to abortion. The most obvious problem with any such argument is that viability has changed over time and is heavily dependent on factors such as medical advances and the availability of quality medical care that have nothing to do with the characteristics of a fetus. So that's true if you think about it. If you're in, what's been termed a third world country, and, you have some sort of, you or the baby have some sort of medical condition, whether the child is likely to survive is statistically going to be much lower where there's, no ready access to general medical care, where you might not have clean running water, where, you might have, there might not be ultrasounds available or whatever, things where you can diagnose and treat conditions where, if you're living in the city of Chicago or New York or, really anywhere in the US, but where, you have the choice of many different hospitals and specialists and medical procedures and facilities and equipment, you're going to be able to save the life of this unborn child much easier with the use of all of those things, right? So viability, are we to say, how does that really, in terms of defining when a life is a life in the terms of the court, does it make sense to say then, if you live in this third world country, well, life doesn't start until the third trimester, or life doesn't start until you're born? But, over here where there's better medical care, life starts, at when you're viable at, 22 weeks or whatever.
Well,
does that really make sense?
Well,
Yeah.
right. Well, I mean, this is where my meat and potatoes is philosophy and theology. And that was one of the things here is, like, as you're saying, it becomes arbitrary when you start talking about viability. Brian's son was born at 25 weeks. That's not viable in Haiti, but it's viable. It was viable here.
That's not even viable in northern Michigan. I mean, even within the same states, there's different levels of viability.
Right.
Based on medical care.
Right. So when you're...
And just in case people don't know, in case they're tuning in because they like me and they don't know about you guys, I don't know, because I was advertising this too. But his son is, the viability worked out very well in his favor because he's how old now?
He's 11.
Oh my gosh, 11. Dang. I'm glad I didn't guess that because I would have gotten that wrong. Time flies. But the kid's 11, guys. So, I mean, anyway, I just had to interject that. This is, anyway, go ahead. And philosophy, just so you know, this is why we were destined to be friends. One of my many majors and degrees and things, I was a philosophy major. So, Anyway.
Hi,
makes
people.
sense.
So yeah, exactly. So when you really get to that, it's like, well, philosophically, we have to just define life, and there was really no consistent line, right? Unless you just say conception, because that is when the unique form of DNA is it begins with. The DNA remains the same. That you can take a DNA sample from the fertilized egg all the way up to when they're 98 years old, it's going to match, and that's why it's the same human. And now, when it comes down to it, what it really just comes down to, as we mentioned at the beginning. I think some people missed that maybe in the live chat at the very beginning. It just comes down to, it's not your life and it's not your body, right? So it's not your decision that you get to make. It's a body within a body, and that's just the scientific point.
And if we look at it, all throughout the Bible, God is referring to babies that are humans. God, of course, and now I don't have any of my notes, but I've also published my notes and shared them for people to see too. Week 15, I believe, week 15's Constitution segment recap, I went over this as well, the different sections of the Bible, what you know better than I do. But anyway, where, the God knows you in the womb, and God, knows the plans he has for you before you're even born. And, the baby leapt in Mary's womb at the sound of whatever. I can't remember all that stuff. I'm not good at that. But anyway, there's no reference to, well, so there's this clump of cells, and then upon viability, now we're going to start referring to these things as unborn baby. The Bible doesn't differentiate, as far as I know. I mean, Will, correct me if I'm wrong. You're the pastor, not me.
No, you'd be correct. Even in Exodus, it mentions the fact that a woman, if a woman loses a child during a struggle, that they would repay life for life, blood for blood, eye for eye, and all that. So, yep, and then, so yeah, people are already commenting in here regarding that. So, I mean, that's the thing. The Bible makes explicitly clear, and theologically speaking, even ancient Israel, if you read like even what rabbis and sages of old have said, basically they say they don't the only time an exception should be made in a pregnancy is whenever it is the mother's life. Because they say you're not trying to trade life for life, but that, this is what it is. So, yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think the biblical case, in fact, actually, can I get on a soapbox for 2 seconds?
Go for it.
This is actually something that's been really bothering me ever since this decision was made. Now, this brings it back to states, right? So it brings it back to states' rights. So first off, abortion is not banned. So people need to understand that. It's not banned. It's just now it's back to states' decisions, if you will. So it's going back to the states. And now the problem is with that is, of course, there's places like New York, California, and stuff where, like in the New York State, more black babies are actually aborted than born, for example. So when, yeah, exactly. So Margaret Sanger's getting her wish. So
and last I checked, there's still an equal protection clause in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, but not that should matter or anything.
Oh, well, we don't. Well, I feel like nowadays the constitutions, they look at more like guidelines than actual rules. To quote Pirates of the Caribbean. But the thing is like now what's been happening is that with Christians with us now. So Christians are celebrating because we're like finally. We have some people who actually made a political move, which is good because a lot of times people get in power and they don't do anything with it that are on our side. So it's nice to actually see, hey, look, our agenda, like that's what we want. That's the whole point of having these offices is that your agenda is pushed to some degree or other.
Yeah, and babies are actually going to get saved.
Right, that there will be, that maybe we can actually see start pushing toward the states and, slowly working our way to stop sacrificing babies to Moloch. But anyway, the point
because
is
instead of the court actually doing the right thing and the issue is settled once and for all, now we have to battle it 50 more times. That sounds fabulous.
Right. Not awesome. Exactly. So it's just, like I said, it's one of those things where now it's a whole nother issue. But the thing is here is now, so Christians are going, yay, we at least have a win. And then what's happening is these other Christians are coming in and rebuking these other Christians for celebrating this. So they're like, well, people to see you gloating. Think about the hurt people right now. You should love those hurt people too right now. And I'm like, look, bottom line, that because people lost this, what they think is right, or they lost a right. And what it is that, I'm sorry, Christians, stop apologizing for your faith. Stop apologizing for your beliefs. And this isn't even like we have Debbie. Okay, where are you at in here? Yes, I know you're on our side, and I just want stronger arguments, buddy. Don't worry, we've covered all of them on about every single part of our channel. But he's talking in here as well about the fact that, like, hey, we Christians need to have these stronger arguments, but you'll notice the arguments he's using actually are strong philosophical arguments where you don't even need to bring it back to the Bible. It's actually kind of funny. I actually can get people chasing their own tail just by trying to express what is personhood. So when we're really coming down to this, when it comes down to where we're fighting at and whatnot, Christians need to stop being so cowardly and stop pandering to these groups of outrage, trying to make them feel better for their position to murder babies.
Yeah, no one's going, hey, I know we got rid of the genocide, but think about all the people that were genociding those people. Like, they feel bad now. Like, they're lost their livelihood. They can no longer kill people indiscriminately. Like, no one would ever say that. It just shows that they're really on the wrong side of that argument, and they're trying to philosophize a middle ground that they think they need to live in because they don't want to fully accept the truth.
Or they just don't want to deal with the persecution and the hate that might happen if you stand against it. I actually literally used it on someone today. He was saying that we are wrong because we're expecting, the problem is with us Christians preaching about this. This is coming from a Christian who's working toward his PhD. And I'm like, and he said, well, the problem is that Christians are expecting other people who are not Christians to adhere to Christian faith regarding life. And I just asked him, I was like, would you say the same thing if it was the Holocaust? And what is it?
But let's look at it as simple as this. Sorry. The Constitution that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about that there was supposedly this constitutional right to an abortion, right? Well, that stems from, the Constitution. So let's look at the Constitution. And the Constitution clearly says that we have our blessings of liberty, capital B, that these are blessings. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it's talking about these rights that are given to us by God, our Creator, and they're unalienable. And that includes the right to life and liberty. So it's the very foundation of our government, and it's written into the words of the Constitution. For somebody to be playing the fence and saying, well, Christians shouldn't be expecting other people to, abide by the definition of life that Christians hold. Duh, we all have that, because that's why murder is illegal in every single state. Because, in other countries, you're allowed to murder based on different things. I'm not even going to go into all the examples, but we know that's a thing based on different religious practices or cultural norms or whatever. Here, we don't do that. It's never been okay. Murder is always murder, and it's always going to be murder. And the Constitution, there's a reason why we have to be hammering on the Bible and why we shouldn't look to philosophical arguments. Philosophical arguments are great too, but I'm the constitutional attorney, so I'm going to hammer on the Constitution. And the Constitution doesn't point to philosophical arguments. The Constitution points to the fact that the government's sole purpose is to protect our God-given liberties. The Ninth Amendment, which ironically has been used, like Whitmer in her abortion case that she filed in Michigan, which I do plan to file an amicus brief, assuming the court puts an order for additional briefing to be made, and you can put your name on that if you'd like. I have a sign-up sheet. But anyway, one of her arguments is that there's, in the unenumerated clause, which in Michigan is Article 1, Section 23, but it's not the Ninth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, that there's this unenumerated right to an abortion. And I'm like, how stupid are you for a smart person who's an attorney? And I think she knows the law. I actually think she really knows the law well. That's the sad thing. She's just that evil, actually. She's not stupid. She's evil. Because the unenumerated clause talks about our blessings of liberty, that all of those unenumerated rights that are given to us, all of those blessings, we keep and we retain those. And the government still has to protect them. God did not bestow upon anyone the right to indiscriminately murder because you're having a bad day, because you don't have a financial situation that's good, because somebody has assaulted you, unless you might accidentally murder the person that you're trying to defend yourself against because they're in the process of assaulting you, but that's not what happens with abortion. So God did not, there's no stretch of the imagination to say that God gave, it's a blessing of liberty to have an abortion, but that's what the Ninth Amendment is. And life, well, if we're getting all of our rights and all of our liberties from God, we have to turn to God to say, what is life? There's no two ways about it. I don't know. That's my soapbox.
Well, and I think what you're getting at too is like the fundamental difference that I think you mentioned this at the beginning, where people have trouble understanding even what the Constitution is saying, is where those rights are coming from. And you're saying the preamble and the Declaration of Independence is saying the rights are coming from God and government is protecting them. And we have a lot of people that are on the left side of this aisle are saying, well, the rights come from other people saying their rights. And that could be the government, that could be whoever is your local attorney, that could be whoever gets enough people to agree with them, and you have mob control that are determining rights. And that's the distinction I think that you're trying to get at, is that those are, even our definition of what a right is different depending on what your understanding is of God and religion and the nature of the universe.
Well, and there are some government bestowed rights, but those are the few and far between. So, for example, the Michigan Constitution now, I believe, has a provision in there about absentee ballots or something of that nature. It's something to do with voting. It's not just the right to vote, but it's something like that, where you can vote absentee without reason, blah blah blah. Okay, so if that's in the Constitution, that's a state given right. You now have the right. That's not something given by God. I mean, that there's not even anybody on the planet, I would think, that even would try to argue that. So, but that's a rare circumstance. Your right to life, given by God. Your right to liberty, given by God. Your right to protect yourself and your family and your community. Your right to bear arms. That's a right given by God. Your right to have your own home, where your government cannot just come in and search it or make you house and quarter troops or remove you from your home without proper cause, due process of law, a warrant, exigent circumstances, whatever, right? There's all kinds of rights that are all of the things that we think about on a regular basis. Those really are rights given to us by God. But you do have the rare circumstance, like I mentioned, that it's a government given right, but nobody's thinking about that, right? The right to absentee ballot when you ask them what their rights are or whatever.
Well,
I hope not anyway.
it kind of goes down to the moral argument a little bit for God's existence, which is kind of what the backbone of this discussion is a little bit, which is basically, if God exists, then objective moral values and duties exist. So if God exists, therefore we have objective moral duties and values, which also means we have meaning and therefore rights by God. If God does not exist, then we are just a space accident, and we are just a bunch of evolved monkeys that disagree with each other, and therefore we could do whatever the heck we want. We could take away your rights, or I could give you rights, because they're not really rights from anyone. They're just what we arbitrarily have chosen that you can and cannot do. So, which is why the very backdrop of Western society has always been the presupposition that God exists, because that's where the inalienable rights come from. How is it inalienable? Well, as W.J. Presler actually put it, man can't take them. So they can try, they can strive, but it doesn't mean that they have the right to do it. So, sorry, random tangent there as well as far as philosophical angle is concerned.
Well, I want to get on one more question for you, Catherine, before I think we get to some audience questions. But I wanted to hear you spout off a little bit about this whole idea of substantive due process. And should people be paranoid that they will lose their access to contraception and all the other court cases that have tagged this or used substantive due process to find a right or something that the federal government has to determine?
So what's funny about that is, it is a double-edged sword, but that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about because in here, the court talks about so the court's decisions about this liberty, right, this right for this abortion. The court's decisions have held that the due process clause protects two categories of substantive rights. Those rights that are guaranteed by the first 8 amendments to the Constitution. They agree with me on that. And those rights deemed, and by the way, it doesn't say granted, those rights granted. At least they're smart enough to write it correctly. So it literally says those rights guaranteed, another way to say it is protected by the first 8 amendments to the Constitution, and those rights deemed fundamental that are not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. Okay, so anyway, and then they say, well, in deciding whether a right falls into one of these categories, the question is whether the right is deeply rooted in our history and tradition. No, you guys are morons, but whatever. And they continue or round that portion out, though, by saying that, there's all these, there's some confusions about, basically judges kind of inserting their own thoughts, and basically they don't want judicial interpretation, and which I agree with. There should not be judicial interpretation. The Constitution is what it is. But they say, for this reason of all this confusion and the conflicting politics behind everything, the court has been reluctant to recognize rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution. Now, again, that statement is recognize rights, not grant rights, because the government doesn't grant us rights. God gave us rights. They're saying that they have been reluctant throughout history, that the court has been reluctant to recognize rights that are not delineated, mentioned specifically in the Constitution. And that right there, I want to say, again, all of you guys, all of you justices, for the hundreds of years of getting this wrong, you guys are morons and should be disbarred and never be able to practice law, let alone make decisions on behalf of the entire country. Because if you can't read the 9th Amendment, you don't belong holding a law license. The 9th Amendment, it literally, it's just like, it's like a duh moment. It says unenumerated rights, that we retain all of those that are unenumerated, just the same as we're keeping all of those that are enumerated. So it blows my mind. And so at any rate, again, though, it's getting at our rights from God that we retain, not made up rights, rights that have no basis in biblical, values whatsoever. No, God didn't give us the right to, I don't know. I was going to think of some smart ass response there, but I'm tired. I haven't eaten all day, so it's the best I could do. But at any rate, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not something. I want the court to be reluctant to recognize rights that really don't exist because they're not biblically based. And that's important because God gives us our rights. The government doesn't give us our rights. We don't give us our own rights. If that were the case, then why would anybody care what the Supreme Court says?
Yeah, good
if
point.
I can just give myself my own rights and you give yourself your own rights, and then there's a jewelry store over here. I'm just going to go in and grab what I want because I give myself my own rights and I now have the right to go take whatever I want. Not that's not how it works. Nobody's stupid enough to argue that's how it would work.
Well, unless you live in
So-
LA.
Well, or Portland. Portland, I would argue that that's stupid. But so they didn't come from the government, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't even think the most popular liberal-leaning decisions, like Roe v. Wade or any of the cases that, are bad for moral issues or for the Constitution. I don't think any of those even start talking about rights that are given by the government, recognized or guaranteed or something of that nature, I think has been the consistent wording. And so if even the liberal justices can agree to that, I think there's something to that.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if that answer, I was trying to remember exactly what the question was with substantive rights, but.
Yeah, I was just curious if are people right to be paranoid about the other cases that hinge on substantive due process to be redecided?
People should be paranoid about every single thing that any government entity does, ever.
The scariest words. I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Exactly. Yeah, if you're expecting that the government is going to do its job and protect all of your liberties, you need your head examined, and you need to rethink what you're putting your faith in.
Right.
We as a people need to stand up and put our government back in check and fire over 90% of them because their job literally is unconstitutional. And we need to, I don't know, people like Pelosi and others who are, not following the Constitution, even if their job is constitutional, like a senator or a representative or whatever. We need to hold those people accountable. But we can't expect that at this stage. I mean, let me put it this way. We have a Republican form of government. That's the other thing about this. I have to mention too. So, this case talks about so when they're talking about, that the court did wrong in Roe v. Wade, because the court basically said, okay, states, you can't decide this issue. We're going to decide for you. The thing that this court in Dobbs said was that by doing that, Roe v. Wade and Casey, they short-circuited the democratic process by closing it to a large number of Americans who disagreed with Roe. Again, I don't give a crap about who disagrees with the court decision. What matters is not about whether everybody's going to agree, because not everybody's going to agree. There's almost always going to be important issues that nearly half of the population, at least these days, is going to argue with, because that's where we're at. Everybody's entitled and everybody's ill-informed, and that's just how things are. But that doesn't mean that changes the basics of what's right and wrong, of what's constitutional and not constitutional. It's not by popular vote. In fact, democratic process, we don't have a democracy. The justices need to read up on Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution that explicitly guarantees us a Republican form of government, where we elect representatives to do the daily tasks of government, but we, the people, retain ultimate control and authority. So that by itself negates the point that the government's supposed to give us our rights because we have the sovereignty, but it also gets to the point of, we don't have this mob rule. It's not just popular opinion or whoever screams the loudest wins. So, hey, all those people were screaming super loud that they, in their vagina hats and, pink costumes that, they want abortion rights. Okay, they have a First Amendment protected right to do that. That doesn't mean that leads to all of a sudden now there's this right to murder babies.
Yeah,
Anyway.
great point.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
Do you want to get some questions?
Yes. All right. So real quick, let's open this up to some questions because the reason why we wanted to have our friend Katherine Henry on was because we have covered abortion in depth on our channel, and mostly from a biblical and moral and philosophical angle. We had kind of hit it from all the angles. But I am not a constitutional specialist either, so I would rather not speak about law if I know nothing about it. I've read up on all the other stuff, but I've read the Constitution. I know what it says, but it's better to have an attorney who can do that for us a little bit. So do we have any
Sometimes.
questions? Yeah, sometimes.
Most attorneys don't know the Constitution, as sad as that
That's
is.
super sad. We definitely had a
There was
few.
one question up above, yeah.
Did we get? Oh,
There
hold
was.
on. Hold on. We got new comments. In addition to, okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? Because I know there were some questions that people asked. There was one in particular. I apologize to the live audience.
There it is.
There it is.
Yeah.
That's the one by Dusty Gibbs. He asks, "What's the percent chance that this gets flipped back if the court goes liberal?" Serious question, as I'm not sure.
So there would have to be a process where, think of, I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a huge amount of cases that are filed that never quite make it into the hands of the justices. So, cases often start, for example, in state court, and then they work their way through the trial court, and then an intermediate appellate court, and then the state Supreme Court, and then can jump over to the U.S. Supreme Court if there's a constitutional issue for the U.S. Constitution or something like that. Sometimes you start in federal court, like say, for example, I don't know, like if a constitutional attorney decides to file a lawsuit against 3 deputies, a sheriff, 5 prosecuting attorneys, and some judges in like Allegan County, for example, that kind of a case will likely be filed in a federal district court, such as the joke of a court that found itself exercising jurisdiction over, say, gubernatorial candidate Ryan Kelly for the supposed insurrection charges that he's facing. But at any rate, so you start there, and there's a trial court, and then, Court of Appeals, and then circuit court. The amount of cases that actually make it all the way up to the Supreme Court is very small. And so even the ones that have followed every single procedure and timing and all that other stuff, they still, the court decides whether they're going to grant cert, right? That's the terminology, whether they're going to take the case. And, you might think, well, gosh, once it becomes sorry, I'm exhausted. I'm so boring. I'm putting myself to sleep. Now that's a true attorney for you. But when it becomes a liberal-leaning court at some point, well, then, gosh, they might, decide to let in any kind of abortion case that might bring this topic to the forefront. Maybe, but here's the thing. The justices do value stare decisis, that the topic has already been decided and things of that nature. And so, then they would be undoing precedent by, overturning the decision that happened last week. So is it something that could happen? Yes, it could. But the best thing that you can do, honestly, is nothing other than prayer for our country, prayer for a wide variety of, all the elected leaders and those that are appointed and justices and judges and the president. Let me put it this way. I honestly believe there is no way other than through the unending prayer of millions of Christians around this country and possibly around the world, praying for people such as Joe Biden, that this wouldn't have happened. And what is the this? On the heels of this decision and that Second Amendment decision, it was before the religious liberties decision came out, but it was over the weekend. People were asking the White House and the new press secretary, well, is Biden finally going to, is he going to start expanding the Supreme Court so we can add more and essentially pack the court with liberals then, so there'd be more justices than there are now? And I was surprised that the answer is, well, of course it's not really from Biden because it's like a weekend at Bernie's there. But anyway, who's ever writing the script for him, that it's not a good idea to do that because it would be seen as political. Well, obviously it's going to be political. And I mean, you have people like Nancy Pelosi and who is the other one? There's some congressmen and women who are literally saying the court has no, what is the terminology? I don't want to say validity. Maybe that is, the court has lost its, the court has lost its validity, and so you have to add more justices so you can get the validity back to the court. What crack are you on? Like that must be some good stuff, because that makes literally no sense whatsoever. I mean, logic was one of my favorite classes all through middle school and high school and in college, and I had A+, and I can tell you that there's no logical connection by packing the court full of a bunch of liberal justices that somehow you're going to then make it valid, that the process is valid. You have saturated and watered down how people are selected onto the court just to be able to get the outcome that you want, and that somehow makes the court's decisions from then on valid. I mean, so at any rate, the Biden administration is taking a stance that no, that would not be a good thing to do. So I think that is truly something that, because there had been talk about that happening and then they've been pushing it before. I think that is really a byproduct of prayer making some headway, some change, and it might seem simple or it might seem small, but that's actually huge. Especially, I mean, they're getting a lot of backlash from liberals all around the country because they're, and because they're not taking strong enough stances against these recent court decisions. Where you have AOC out there saying that we're going to start, performing abortions on federal land. Like, what? So I think that there is some hope there, but could things be overturned? Yeah, I mean, it can.
Right, there's always a possibility of anything like that. Couple things I thought that would be worth mentioning as well is, of course, get involved. These are some of the comments mentioned this as well. Pray for your country, pray for your leaders, get involved locally, and vote. Those are the things that you can do. If you want to see things change and keep going the right direction, those are the best things you can do. I hear people all the time, they say, oh, I don't keep up on politics, I just go and vote. And I don't understand how anyone can do that, because how do you vote without being informed? I have no idea. So get involved. Get involved. Like, otherwise you're just literally hitting check marks randomly. You have no idea what you just voted for. If you are like, well, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. Well, dude, that's a very broad spectrum of each party. So get involved locally and vote. So I haven't seen any other questions pop up in the live feed. And I know you've had a really long day, so I'm actually okay with closing this up. Are there any closing comments you had regarding this, either one of you two?
Yeah, so my every Wednesday I do a way to get involved challenge. Wednesday's way to get involved challenge, because I like alliteration and I'm a dork. So anyway, this week I challenged people to sorry, I can't help I have to go on this tiny little tangent because there's a comment. Get that voting sticker. So I want to say that it was a Barbie, that there's a voting Barbie, and she has a ballot in her hand, And then she has the I voted sticker. And so somebody was commenting, well, whoa, is this vote trafficking? Because she already voted, she's got the sticker, and now she has another ballot in her hand. So anyway, that's what came to my mind when I saw that. And I wanted to share why I was laughing about getting the sticker. So, oh, dang it. What was I talking about? Because that was not the important thing. Barbie was not the important.
I think Catherine, were you getting at like some of the stuff to get involved with what you're working on and how to
Yeah, well,
find
that's
you?
not what well, this isn't even what I'm working on, but my way to get involved challenge of the week was to pick one of those 3 decisions. You know, are you a huge Second Amendment advocate? Are you someone that's big into religious liberty? Well, if you're watching this particular podcast, probably are going to end up picking that one, but not necessarily guaranteed. Or are you someone who just feels strongly about, the right to life? Pick one of those 3 decisions that, happened in the last 7 days. I talked about a little bit about each of them, talked about the case names, and like I said, all of them are available through my website. I asked people to pick one of them, and I would love it if you would read the whole decision. But I realized, and like one of them was like 219 pages. A lot of people aren't going to do that. But to do read the summary is basically what it is. The court puts out their own summary of the decision, the main opinion, and they call it the syllabus. And so they're usually about 6 to 7 pages or so. I want to say one of them might have been 5, one of them was 8, one of them was 6, something like that this week for those 3. But it's and they're not that big of pages. In fact, I'm going to show you guys. Oh, that stupid sliver. This is the size. Let's see if you can see it. I can't figure out how to turn this. Okay, so see that it's not legible. This lighting is terrible, and I can't figure out the angle to hold everything. But you see the paper is not, it's like half of the page is really all it prints on, right? I mean,
Yeah.
And it's just how they do it. It's how they waste paper. And it really frustrates me. But those are the opinions, like, as they come out from the court. So really, if I'm saying to you it's 8 pages, it's really like 4 pages of reading, okay? And so this might seem like I'm overly laboring on this point, but essentially 4 pages worth of reading for you to read words from the court itself. So you're not taking my word for it. So you're not taking Brian's word for it or Will's word for it. You read it for yourself, especially in an election year. But we can't do this thing where we just wait for the media, even if it's a podcast like this, that we can't just wait for the media to tell us what's going on with our government. So it's just one of the ways, like I said, I do these every week, and that's just this week's particular challenge. But I'm really asking people to do that because it doesn't take attorneys to read the Constitution. It doesn't take attorneys to read the law or to read a court decision. Sometimes it sounds like it's written in a foreign language, but that's because a bad judge wrote it. Any good case, any good decision is written so easily that a typical, I was going to say a typical 8th grader, but a typical homeschooled 8th grader can read it.
Oh, roasting my people. I was homeschooled, so that's why I'm not a good learner.
No, I think she's roasting public school.
Oh,
Yeah, I was roasting everybody else.
Okay, well, I feel better.
I
Suddenly I'm
homeschool.
intelligent again. That's
Yeah, no, I
right.
homeschool. My kids are homeschooled. So,
Smart choice, especially with how crazy and ridiculous schools are now. But that's another topic for another time. Ooh, we should talk about that sometime. But now with that, so now if people want to find more of you, because again, you're a big, you have You have a court case going on right now. People can go to your website or your YouTube page and find that. It's actually kind of horrifying. Brian, you did a great editing skills on that, by the way. It still hits me in the feels. She has a court case going on right now where constitutional rights were violated. Again, this is her shtick, the Constitution, as an attorney. And so if you guys want to know more about the legal processes, if you guys want more political commentary from a constitutional perspective, what is the best way for people to find you, get involved, and what are things that they can do to support you?
My website is Restore Freedom, K as in Catherine, H as in Henry.com, restorefreedomkh.com. And, we have all kinds of different social media, of course, Facebook and YouTube and Rumble. And, Lori hopefully is typing very fast about all the things I'm forgetting. But at any rate, we're out there everywhere, but we're actually shadow banned in quite a few places. So our growth has not happened at all in almost 2 years. But if you go to our website, that's going to be the best place. And eventually we'll, when I finish figuring out how to code everything and have the time to do so, you'll be able to actually see our live videos like right through the website and all that without us hosting it. It's anyway, fun stuff that I'm figuring out on the fly. But we just relaunched our brand new website, and it hopefully looks better. No offense to the team who was part of doing the first one, because I'm very grateful to those such as Brian, and my dad, and the guy sleeping on the bench next to me, and Joe Moss, another wonderful freedom fighter. But it's just, it was a conglomeration of things. We were building the plane as it was flying, and it became hard to make information available. So not everything is on there, but it is. I have quite a few pages already written, and more will come. I'm also in the process of writing a brand new app. But if you go to the Google Play or Apple App Stores, you can go search for Restore Freedom, and you'll find our purple and white logo, Restore Freedom. And that's right now, it's just got the U.S. and Michigan constitutions, and it's not the most user-friendly app, but I didn't write that one. The one I am writing is going to knock that one out of the park. It's not even going to be a comparison. And we'll start with the U.S., Michigan, and Florida constitutions and add hopefully 48 more states in a short amount of time. But anyway, tons of free resources. So please check us out there. And if you do have any interest in financially supporting us, whether you have literally, I've had people send me $2 at a time because that's all they have, or you have $2,000 that you'd like to donate, or whatever, anything in between, anything more than that. Every little bit helps. And our website, don't laugh about how horrible the size of all the pictures and graphics are, because they all look really funny, but that's what happens when you go from one theme on WordPress to another and whatever. But we have Venmo and PayPal and Square, and there's an address to send actual, paper checks and things like that for people who hate, the internet. Anyway, every little bit helps. But if you can pray for the Allegan County case, that would be the best, the best prayer focus right now for us, because it's literally consumed my life for 20 months, and it has honestly wide-reaching implications. And if you can show up and support us on July 7th, which is also my husband's birthday, he's so excited to be spending that day in Allegan County. But we have several motions pending that day, including 2 motions to dismiss. And then July 13th, if that motion hearing doesn't go as it should, then July 13th is the jury trial at 9 a.m. And all of that is, if you click on our website, there's the calendar, and we always keep the Google Calendar updated with any information and any links. What does she use for history curriculum? Oh, for homeschooling. I don't have a set curriculum. I go with whatever I see. Basically. So, for
Teacher's
example,
choice.
yeah, my daughter, our youngest child is in second grade, and she's finishing second grade up. And she's actually in Michigan right now. She stayed when we came back. But she is, so when she comes back, we're going to have to finish the homeschooling year and round things out and do testing. And so I'm starting to use, Google Classroom and Google quizzes, forms, whatever they're called. And so I'm thinking to myself, I took a step back and I was like, well, I need to have the overall plan for her whole education through graduation, making sure we're covering every topic that's important. I'm not going to have a government tell me what's important. And I'm like, well, what kinds of things, for social studies? Oh, well, she needs to know the states and the capitals, and she needs to know the presidents, and she needs to know about the Constitution, and she needs to be able to tell us what the first 10 amendments are, but she also needs to tell us what Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 are about, and she needs to know how many articles are in the Constitution. 7, by the way. She needs to be able to tell us how many amendments. She needs to be able to tell us, how many articles are in the state constitution, and she needs to be able to tell us what a Republican form of government is, and what are the duties of 3 branches of government. And anyway, so I started writing all these lists of things, and I'm like, this is what every child should know. So basically, anything social studies. I'm not relying on anybody else to tell me what my child should learn. I'm writing it, and I will be sharing it. I actually will be, hopefully this year in 2022, but I will be starting Constitution courses, and I specifically want to focus ones that would be geared towards, middle schoolers and high schoolers, and eventually elementary school kids. So anyway, I plan to share my knowledge at all levels.
So we should send those to your favorite senator or representative so they can learn at the middle school level at least how to be government.
Let's be honest, send them the kindergarten lessons. Let's go from there.
Yeah.
I'm going to send them to AOC, so I can't wait till those links go up.
He will do it.
Awesome.
So anyway, all right, guys, go follow Katherine Henry. You can find her on YouTube, Rumble. Go to her website, Restore Freedom KH. And so you go check her out. Go support her. I know she's an old friend of ours, and she's somebody
Not that old yet. My birthday's on Sunday, but I'm not that old yet. Come on now.
Okay, all right. She's a very young friend of ours, and I honestly have appreciated her work. We made a lot of headway during the COVID lockdowns and everything, just because of a lot of stuff she's done. She has sacrificed a lot for her community and a lot for our own people up here in Michigan. I know I'm going to toot your horn, so deal with it. And it's one of those things where it has cost her a lot of money out of pocket, far more out of her own pocket than what she obviously gets. So if you guys can financially support her, please consider doing so. And with that being said, Katherine, thank you so much for your time and for coming and having. I enjoy all the conversations we have, and I enjoy the sarcastic remarks even more. I forgot how many she has of those.
Oh yeah.
As soon as she
She's
starts
fired.
spouting off, like, oh yeah, I forgot how much I missed that. So thank you so much, and guys, go follow her work. Katherine, thank you for joining us, and you all take care. And
We got to
God
thank
bless.
this guy.
Oh,
He's been
thank
sitting
you,
here
Mike.
patiently, and
Mike.
he has to go to work at 7 a.m, and he's sitting on a park bench in a town 45 minutes away from home just so we could do this. So,
Mike, you're the man.
and we haven't eaten dinner yet, so he's been patiently waiting for that too.
Beautiful. Okay, well, if that's the case, I'll let you get to that. Thank you so much for coming on, Katherine, and we'll be in
thank
touch. Maybe we'll have you chatting sometime soon about the school system or something. It'd be fun.
Sounds wonderful.
All right, take care, Katherine.
Yep. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Good night.